Hello everyone, my name is Umesh Kadam and today I am going to share with you certain tips for teaching of international humanitarian law. I have taught this subject for almost 20 years in various Indian law schools, and for almost 20 years thereafter I have worked for International Committee of the Red Cross as a legal advisor, and I was dealing with implementation and promotion of international humanitarian law. Therefore, I have been dealing with this subject matter for more than 40 years, and hence I would like to share certain tips for teaching of this law in the best possible manner. Before I move on to international humanitarian law, I would like to start with general tips for making a presentation and then a few guidelines for teaching of international law related courses, and then we will proceed to discuss how to teach international humanitarian law. Now, coming to making a presentation in general, including a PowerPoint presentation, my suggestion is that we use only bullet points in our PowerPoints. It is good not to have more than 5 or 6 bullet points on one slide, and it is also important to avoid long sentences or paragraphs on a slide, because students do not have time to read long paragraphs, and we don't want them to pay their attention on reading the paragraphs or long sentences, because we want them to listen to us and our explanation, our clarification on those particular points. So it is important that we don't use long sentences, we don't use lot of substance on PowerPoint slides, we use only bullet points, and we explain the bullet points, each and every point, as and when we proceed with the presentation. Wherever possible, we can use images or photographs if they are relevant and if they are going to strengthen the point that we are going to make. I'll share with you this presentation and also some sample slides separately, not in the course of this presentation, but separately you will have an opportunity to see the entire presentation, what I am going to say today, and some sample slides where I have used certain images. But feel free to use images and photographs or sketches to highlight your points. It's important to give an outline of our presentation at the beginning and also concluding remarks at the end, because an outline of a presentation, it helps us in structuring the presentation and also for students to know what exactly we are going to cover in the course of our presentation. So an outline of our presentation is important, and also at the end of the presentation to give certain concluding observation highlighting the key points that we have made in the course of our presentation. Now, regarding teaching of international law in general, I want to share with you certain experiences of mine. Now, public international law is a very peculiar subject matter. It's very different from domestic law, as we know, as every law teacher knows that public international law is very different. Of course, it operates at international level, its sources are different, the way it is made is different, its subjects are different, and so on. But this law has certain specific features. For example, we are all aware that international law is a weak law. It's not very strong like domestic laws for various reasons, because it deals with sovereign states, and sovereign states do not like any authority above them to tell them that you have to behave in this way or that way. And therefore, there is a lot of resistance on the part of sovereign states to develop international law, to make it effective, or to have compulsory dispute settlement mechanisms, because states are very jealous about their sovereignty. And as a result, international law remains a weak law. Of course, still it is useful, and within the limitations that we have in the field of international law, it always serves an useful purpose. We will see how it operates, but it is equally important to note that international law operates in a politically charged environment. It is a highly politicized law because political factors influence the entire process of making of international law, its implementation, ensuring respect to this law, and so on. And therefore, it is important to make it known to the students, highlight the fact that unlike domestic law, international law is a politicized law. Now, let me come to teaching of international humanitarian law. Of course, we know very well that international humanitarian law is a branch of public international law. It is not a law by itself having its independent existence, but it is a part of public international law. Like any other branch of public international law, say for example law of the sea, law relating to diplomatic relations, law relating to treaties, law relating to aviation and space exploration, international trade law, and so on. So, like these branches, international humanitarian law happens to be one of the branches of public international law, and that is why what I have said regarding international law in general, regarding its weakness, regarding its sources, it also applies to international humanitarian law. Now, when it comes to teaching of international humanitarian law, we start with a basic introduction, and the key introductory topics which we can deal with are like definition, field of application, historic origin, sources of this law, importance of this law in today's society, why this law why this law is important today, because it's mainly because of proliferation of armed conflicts around the world. And if you look at what's happening in countries like Syria or in Afghanistan or in Iraq or in faraway places, everywhere there are issues coming up on daily basis regarding ensuring respect to international humanitarian law, protection of persons affected by armed conflict, and so on. Then, after having dealt with introductory topics, we can proceed to explain fundamental principles and basic rules of international humanitarian law, because once students understand fundamental principles of this law, like principle of humanity, military necessity, proportionality, principle of limitation, principle of precaution, and so on, it is easier for students to understand rules which are made on the basis of these principles. Because if you look at any rule of international humanitarian law reflected in the Geneva Conventions, their protocols, or weapons conventions, they are essentially based on these fundamental principles. So once students understand what are the basic principles, then they very well appreciate the subsequent developments in the field of this law and what are the new challenges and so on. Then at the beginning of our introduction to international law, it is important to trace key developments in this field of law. There have been many landmark developments regarding international humanitarian law during last 100-200 years. For example, the Labor Code, which was adopted in United States, the first Geneva Convention of 1864, then the St. Petersburg Declaration of 1868, the Hague Conferences of 1899 and 1907, then coming closer to the Geneva Conventions of 1949, and then thereafter additional protocols of 1977. Then we can also trace developments in the field of regulation of weapons. Weapons conventions like starting with St. Petersburg Declaration and then coming to Biological Weapons Conventions or back to Geneva Gas Warfare Protocol of 1925, then 1972 Biological Weapons Convention, 1993 Chemical Weapons Convention, 1997 Ottawa Treaty on Landmines, and then series of modern developments dealing with various types of weapons. So to give them an outline as to how the law has developed over long period of time is important for students to see that the law keeps developing, the law is dynamic, it keeps progressing from time to time. Then also at the same time we can give them certain highlights of few methods of warfare, such as giving quarter to prisoners of war, respecting white flag of truce, and so on. So these are some of the methods of warfare. And along with means of warfare, which are weapons, it is equally important to stress that there are certain methods of warfare which go side by side with means of warfare. Then finally, we have to highlight what are the mechanisms for implementation of international humanitarian law. Mechanisms which can be divided into national mechanisms as well as international mechanisms. Because international humanitarian law can be implemented at the national level, and there are certain mechanisms which operate exclusively at the national level, but in today's world we also have international mechanisms like international war crime trials, international investigations, or international arbitration in certain situations, and so on. Then in the course of our teaching we also have to highlight that humanitarian law happens to be a branch of public international law, and it has very close relationship with the few branches of international law in general. Let me highlight this first of all. First of all, there are certain common principles, like principles applicable to jurisdiction, state responsibility. These are applicable to all branches of international law, of course. Then sources, then subjects of international law, then jurisdiction, state responsibility, as I said, then applicability of law of treaties to IHL conventions, because IHL conventions are essentially treaties which are governed by the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. So general norms regarding treaty interpretation are applicable to IHL treaties as well. Then dispute settlement mechanisms which exist at the international level, the same mechanisms like adjudication, arbitration, conciliation, mediation, good offices, negotiations, all these dispute settlement mechanisms which apply to other branches of public international law would also apply to international humanitarian law. Then, as I said earlier, IHL has strong links with some of the sub-disciplines or some of the branches of international law, other branches of international law. Now, one key area is law relating to use of force. And as teachers of international law, we are very well aware of what UN Charter says about use of force in international relations. Article 2, paragraph 4 of the UN Charter, which prohibits use or threat of force against territorial integrity, political independence of other states, the right of self-defense, etc. These are of course not part of international humanitarian law, but nevertheless they are very closely connected with the phenomenon of warfare. And hence sometimes students have confusion whether this also is a part of international humanitarian law. Well, we have to first of all explain to the students that this is another branch of public international law closely associated with humanitarian law, but it is not per se part of humanitarian law, because humanitarian law does not deal with legality of use of force, who has lawfully used force, who is aggressor, who is defending. That is none of the business for IHL. IHL is focusing on what are the consequences of the use of force, who are the victims, how they can be protected, how we provide relief to people affected by situations of armed conflict without looking at who started the war or why the war was started and so on. So humanitarian law is essentially concerned with conduct of hostilities, the way hostilities are conducted in the course of a battle, in the course of warfare. But equally important is another branch dealing with use of force, which we call as jus ad bellum, whereas humanitarian law in Latin is known as jus in bello. So this is important for the students to know at the beginning, otherwise they might confuse. Then other areas of international law that have close relationship with humanitarian law are human rights law, refugee law, international migration law, because these are also in a way dealing with indirectly situations of armed conflict. People become refugees in many situations because of wars and non-international armed conflicts. People also migrate because of consequences of warfare in many situations. Those who migrate because of poverty is a different story, and it has nothing to do with humanitarian law. But if people are migrating because of armed conflict, then naturally there are certain intersections and common overlaps between migration law and humanitarian law. Human rights law is very closely associated with international humanitarian law. Of course, human rights also operate in times of armed conflict, and there is good deal of overlap between human rights and humanitarian law. They complement to each other, but they are not one and the same. They are different disciplines which are complementary, which derive strength from each other, which support each other, but they maintain their own identities and they have their own ways of ensuring respect to the norms. But it is important as a part of teaching to explain to the students what are the relationships between international humanitarian law and other areas of law. One more area of international law that is very closely associated, especially during last 20-30 years, this has become very clear, is international criminal law. Because as we know, war crimes is a major international crime, and the International Criminal Court, which has been established under the Rome Statute adopted in 1998, and the court became functional in the year 2002, which has its seat at The Hague, is now currently dealing with number of international crimes such as war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and so on. So, war crimes are essentially serious violations of international humanitarian law, and therefore international criminal law is very closely associated with international humanitarian law. This needs to be highlighted because international criminal law in a way gives strength to humanitarian law. When we say violations, or rather serious violations of humanitarian law can be prosecuted at the international level, and those who are guilty of these violations can be punished at the international level, essentially what we are talking about is implementing humanitarian law in a very effective way, and hence criminal law, international criminal law, has given lot of strength to humanitarian law. Now when we talk about international criminal law, often there is a misconception that we are talking about international tribunals. No, that is not the case. International criminal law can operate at the national level as well, and there are many countries that have established international crimes tribunals within their domestic systems, and they punish international crimes within these domestic tribunals dealing with these types of crimes. Like, as I said, war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, can be punished at the national level as well. So that needs to be highlighted. Now with this, I'll conclude first part of my presentation